Okay, we are recording. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to start sharing my screen so we can start, we can continue with the presentation from yesterday. Okay, so we had just finished the part about repetition, but I'm going to go ahead and, good morning. Just going to do like a quick recap. So we are looking at poetry. And so a poem is an artistic form of writing that helps activate our imagination and our feelings. And the person who writes a poem is called a poet. I have to put my timer on. And let's see, we went through the first few steps of a method of analysis called TP cast. So right now we finished the T, which is for title, P, paraphrase, and we're in the middle of the C, which is connotation. So connotation itself is one step, but it has a lot of different elements. So one of those elements that we left off of is rhyme. So we did rhyme, and we were looking at all these image, metaphor, rhyme. I showed you some examples in music, and then repetition also happens. And we had that example in a song. So connotation has all of these different pieces. Attitude is one of them. So we're continuing right now. So tone, attitude and tone are very similar. They're how the attitude of the speaker toward the subject of the poem. So what is the difference between the speaker and the reader and the poet and the author? So we had that idea of tutoring, or I think last afternoon we had the idea of a dog. So if somebody likes their teacher, then tutoring might be a good thing. If they don't like their teacher or they don't like the material of the class, then tutoring might not be so fun. Same thing for dogs. Maybe like myself, I love dogs. So when I hear the word dog, I have an image of my dog and I have a very good feeling. But if someone has a fear of dogs, they're afraid, then they have probably a negative attitude, a negative connotation in their head and in their heart. So this video, let me make sure the volume's up, has the idea of attitude. So the two situations are different, but they say the exact same thing. Their words are the exact same thing, but their tone, their attitude are very different.
Call you back. Is this my car?
State Farm note. For every one of those moments,
This is ridiculous.
there's one of these.
Is this my car? What? This is ridiculous.
This can't be happening.
This can't be happening.
Oh, it's happening, sweetheart.
Oh, it's happening, sweetheart.
Shut up.
Shut up.
That's why State Farm is there.
What a day.
With car insurance for when things go wrong,
What a day.
but also here with car loans to help life go right. State Farm.
Call you back. Is this my car?
So with this example, they say the exact same thing. So she goes, is this my car? So she's excited, her attitude is happy, her body language, and she has a surprise for her. Whereas the other man, his body language, he's shocked, he's a little angry, he doesn't believe that this situation is happening to him. So they say the exact same words, but their attitude is very different. And here in our poem, The Rose That Grew from the Concrete, we have examples of attitude. So did you hear? They're wanting to know, do you have this information as well? They're so curious. Did you hear? They're asking a question. Proving nature's law is wrong. So we think of nature's law as things like the sun will rise in the morning and it will set at night. The earth will keep spinning. But here we're saying those are things that happen in part of nature. Those are the laws. But now it's saying that they're wrong. So that's a very strong attitude, saying that things that will always happen in nature are wrong. Funny, it seems. So we don't know if they mean funny, haha, or funny like irony, like we had in the necklace. It might be the necklace where it's, wow, look at this situation where somebody was working so hard for nothing. And the same thing here. Is it similar? We have to think about our attitude for that line. Long live. So when we have that idea, you usually have that with things like royalty or the monarchs. You say like, long live the queen, long live the king. which is a positive attitude. You say, no, keep going. I want more life for this person, for this, in this case, this thing. And at the very end, no one else ever cared. So if you say that no one ever cared, that can be a very difficult thing to admit because it might make you feel sad, or you are realizing that there was not any other compassion for this thing. So all of these are different attitudes, but they help us to see what could the author, the poet, be talking about, and how do I feel about those words. So you'll have to ask both questions. What is the poet attitude and what is my attitude about this poem? Shift. So shift happens, so TPA. A shift happens in the connotation world as well. Does anything change or move in a different direction in the poem? So if there is a change in time, tone, speaker, images, there's always going to be something that changes. This should always be noted, as this will also affect the meaning. And so I put a road sign here because that's kind of how I imagine it in my head. That you're going around, you're going down one path, down one street, and you're going, and then all of a sudden you turn. So of course, if you think your meaning is going this way and then you turn, it affects the meaning. And how does a shift make a difference? And there's different options. So we have time, tone, speaker, images. So time could be that they go from the past to the present to the future, future to past, whichever kind, or maybe even seasons. It goes from talking about winter to summer, fall to spring. The tone, so we had the kind of the attitude. We went from law is wrong, and then it's funny, and then we have, oh, long live. So that's kind of a little bit different of tone. If a person is speaking in the poem, maybe there's a new person who is speaking. And images, if we have the idea of, oh, something is very happy and bright, and then it changes to something dark, that could be it. Or the opposite, something very cute or excuse me, something very dark, and it goes to something very bright. And again, it will affect the meaning. And so shifts are also called, sometimes when we are talking about poetry, some teachers or some books or different places will call it a volta. And so volta kind of looks like a word that we have in Spanish. So if you're thinking like volta, volta, volta looks like vuelta. And so what is a vuelta? A turn. So it's a shift. And that's exactly what happens too. So volta is Italian and vuelta, of course, is in Spanish. And so here in this poem, we do have a shift. And so it happened by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. So even though this rose is dealing with a very difficult environment, it will continue to grow. So we have that change in attitude. It's like, oh, things are difficult, nobody cares, law is wrong, but, and we have that turn, but this rose will continue to survive. So that's an attitude and a little bit in time because it says that it learned to breathe. So it learned, we have our ed ending, which tells us that this happened in the past. So the rose learned how to survive in the past, excuse me, and is continuing to breathe this fresh air. Okay, so that completes that part. Okay, so then we get to, oh, I said something incorrect. So shift happens in TP cast. So TP cast, so that's S, that's shift. I should have said that, excuse me. Shift. And so once we get past the S, we go to title again. So if you remember, our very first step, our very first pass was the title. But we have all of this new information behind us. So you need to reconsider the title again, and plus reconsider all the information that you already have. So what other meanings might the title have now that you have almost finished your analysis? And you can go back and look at your notes and you can see, oh, you know what? I was right. I was fully correct in my guess, in my prediction. Or you can say, no, I was completely wrong, and that's perfectly fine too. So in this case, for the rose that grew from the concrete, we said, well, maybe it's a poem about a garden. No, it wasn't a poem about a garden, and that's okay. But now we know the poem is about a person. So they're saying that there's a beautiful person that's in a difficult situation, and they continue to have a good life even though they were in a difficult situation. Is your perspective different now? Usually, yes. That is the goal. We want our perspective to be different because the first step, we only had a little bit of information, but now we have so much more. And so hopefully our point of view, our perspective has changed. And what new information do you have now? So you have information about image, metaphor, rhyme, simile, paraphrase, shift, attitude. You have all of this new information, and so now you can say, "Here's how my point of view has changed." Now the last step is theme. So every poem has a big idea or feeling. This theme is the underlying message. So this is the message underneath what we see. So this is like the foundation, the support. And this is usually what the poet knows or feels about life. And it may be true, sometimes maybe not, but we have, more often than not, it's true. So I know that a lot of you as my students, you like Harry Potter. So another example, so for Harry Potter, it has themes of love, family, good and evil. And so how do we find the theme? We think, okay, we did all this work, now what? So you can go over your steps again. And maybe now is the time where you feel you have enough information to write your paraphrase. I mentioned yesterday that sometimes writing a paraphrase is really hard because we're not ready for it. We only read the poem one time, perhaps, and we have not put an analysis about the image, repetition, attitude, all of those connotation elements. Maybe now that we're ready for a paraphrase, we start getting a better idea of the theme. And if you're still feeling stuck, read the poem again. All the answers that we're looking for are in the poem. That is the source. That is the font of our information. So for this poem, The Rose That Grew from the Concrete, we have to start asking, well, what is the theme of this poem? And so in my opinion, it's about hope, it's about perseverance, and about conviction. Now, if I had to just choose one, I would probably say perseverance, because there's obviously a difficult situation for this rose or this person, but they continue to do well. They continue to grow, and they continue to keep learning and becoming the best version of themselves. But also hope is possible, conviction. If you right now are sitting and you're thinking, you know what, I think it's this other thing, that's fine because all of us have a different perspective. And we may not have the same perspective as each other or as the author, as the poet themselves. Now, some other things that are important about poems. Those were the words that were commonly mispronounced. We did that yesterday, but just good to look at them again to see where they are. So if you want to practice at home, practice reading this out loud and alta voz by yourself or with a family member, a friend, just to practice. I mean, we don't have the opportunity to practice as much because of the video conference, but it's still a really good skill to do. Another important thing about most poetry, sometimes people get crazy with this stuff, but this is a pretty easy example. We also have to look at punctuation. So we have to figure out where to breathe. I don't know if any of you play music or sing, but usually music tells us when we take a breath or when we take a rest so we can start over. And that's what punctuation helps us do in poetry. So for example, here we are. We can't say, did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? There's no reason to pause there. They're on separate lines. They're not all together. But because we have the question mark, that's how we know it's still one complete idea, one thought. So it should be, did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? That's one idea. And the same thing happens. So instead of saying proving nature's law wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. So that pause after it sounds weird. And of course, right now it's very long. I'm doing it in a very dramatic way. But we need to hear those pieces all together. And again, it's like music where if the beat is off, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't have the right meaning or feeling, as if we just can look at our signals, like our punctuation, to help us. Where we say if we have a comma is like a little pause to take a breath and add drama, maybe, but we don't want to completely stop for 4 or 5 seconds because then we forget what we're talking about. The whole idea, the image, and the feeling are different if we don't treat the sound with respect. Capitalization is also a little bit different, but because of the punctuation, that helps us. So you see we have a capital D, capital P, capital F, capital L. So that also helps us know where there's a new line. In a poem we're going to look at today, if not tomorrow, the punctuation has like one exception, but it has a significance. It helps us with an understanding in the poem because we remember that proper nouns, people, locations, those are given capital letters. So I want us to look at some poems I have started that we're going to look at. I'm going to start with this one that I started. So I'm going to do a TP-Cast analysis with you right now. You can also go into your week 2. I put pictures of I made a big poster, so it's a little easier to read, but you can follow along with my Google Doc as well. So this should give you an example, excuse me, of what you need to do when you analyze a poem. So the poem that we're going to analyze together right now is called Harlem, and it's by Langston Hughes. And so right now, this is what I have, like the clean version of the text. So there's no markings, it's just the poem, the title, and the poet. Let me see if we have any questions. Oh, I have a pause. No, okay. So this is, like I said, this is like the clean version. So let me go ahead and read it. Oh, yeah. Now I'll read it and then we'll go through TP-Cast step by step. So Harlem by Langston Hughes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over, like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? So that's the poem. So again, this is another one that's pretty short. So if we're going to start with our TP-Cast, we have to start with our title. So Harlem. So what do we know about Harlem? So I happen to know that Harlem is a neighborhood in New York City. In the history, it was predominantly black Americans living there, especially when the author Langston Hughes was living there. So I don't know, maybe this is a poem about the black experience in America, and it might talk about a black person's perspective in the or hood. So that's T for title. Now paraphrase. Now I already read the poem, so I already know. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over, like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? So after reading that, I have to ask, okay, how do I say this in my own words? And it can be a little difficult, but I started it, like I said before, we had class. So my version is, what happens if we don't follow our dreams? Does it dry up, rot, or decay? Maybe nothing happens. or maybe our futures blow up. So it's very similar to the poem, but it's in my own words. The C, the connotation. So we're looking for elements like rhyme, imagery, metaphors, and shifts. So I don't have enough space really in this box to do it. So what I did is I copied and pasted the clean poem, and now I have different places where I have it. I also did a first version, you can see this, on a sheet of paper. So I don't have a printer at home, so all I did is I wrote the poem down since it's short, and then I started making marks on my paper. And you can do that too. The picture that I put on Schoology, I used all my different markers to make different notes, so it's really colorful. You can do that too. If you want to do it digitally, like I'm about to show you, that's perfectly fine as well. Okay, so this is our image, looking for images. So when you see words like dream, that has a very specific image. Maybe it's like a dream, like a physical dream where you're asleep and your mind is working, or a dream, like we mentioned, where, oh, I dream to be a doctor one day so I can help my parents. That's a dream too. If something is dry, we have a really strong image of something dry. And also raisins. You can picture a raisin and in the sun. So you're like, okay, well, what happens to a raisin in the sun? You can picture that very clearly. And so fester, this is a good example of maybe we don't know what fester means. Let's look it up. Let's get a dictionary. So fester means that if there's a wound, so like if you have a cut and it gets infected and you can see that there's a lot of bacteria and it gets really gross, that's what fester means. And a sore is the same thing. It's like a cut or an open wound. So you think, oh, fester like a sore, that does not sound healthy. It doesn't sound very positive. And then run. So when you have the image of running, that's a very specific idea. Maybe it's different for me, it's different for you, but the word run is it gives a big image. And stink like rotten meat. I hope none of you have ever smelled rotten meat, but it's terrible. It's awful. Even just thinking about it right now, I have a terrible image in my mind. Or does it crust and sugar over? I always think of like old bananas where they get really sweet. So it's like, ugh, you can't even eat them anymore. And the same thing with syrupy sweet. If there's old fruit, you just really don't want to eat it because it doesn't smell very good. That's a big image. And maybe it just sags like a heavy load. So you can imagine most times in school you have your backpack, it's super heavy, you're going around and it sags. It kind of like weighs itself down. And then we have explode. So explode that's a big image, right? Especially when it comes to a dream. Here we have metaphor and simile. So does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? So the dream, can a dream dry up? No. So that's a metaphor right there. And then we have the word like a raisin in the sun. So bam, right away we know. If we see the word like, simile. So here we're talking about the dream. Can a dream fester? No. Like a sore, simile? No, but the simile. Does it stink like rotten meat? Again, that word like. This is a really good poem to show similes. And like a syrupy sweet. So can a dream be syrupy sweet? No. And a dream cannot be like a heavy load. Another simile. And a last metaphor. Or does a dream explode? And again, dreams can't explode, but here we have that image of an exploding dream. So we have both metaphors and similes here. Rhyme, we do have rhyme in this. So in this case, unlike the music examples we had, the rhyme happens at the end. So sun, run, meet, sweet, load, explode. So we have a pair, a pair, a pair. So they kind of make a nice rhythm once you're listening and once you're talking. And they do happen at the end. And we also have repetition here. So it's a little bit different. than for example, we had in the rose that grew from the concrete. It said rose that grew from the concrete, rose that grew from the concrete. So we had a whole phrase, a whole string of words together that repeated. But in this case, we have repetition of questions. So we have a question, question mark, another question, question mark, question, question mark. So this poem is mostly questions. So that tells us something. So that's powerful. So we're saying that this person has questions but no answer. So they're just asking questions, and they're wondering, they're doubtful, and they're not sure what's going on. The only just regular sentence is maybe it just sags like a heavy load. But even the word maybe, with maybes, you're not really sure if something is going to happen or if something is true. So we have a lot of questions and then a maybe. So that shows us how powerful repetition can be. And shift, we also have a shift. So here it happens at the very end. Here we have things like, well, is it like fruit? Is it like a cut? Is it like meat or something kind of sweet? We don't know. And then they kind of go maybe. And then all of a sudden we get a very violent image of explode. So if something is festering, like a sore, like if you have a cut on your hand, it takes time. It's going to take a couple of days. If you put a grape, like uva, out in the sun, it's going to take time to dry into a raisin. Meat takes a couple of days to rot. Like I mentioned, the bananas, like bananas take a long time to get syrupy and too sweet. But explode, that's a big shift in time and image and attitude. So if something explodes, it happens right in an instant, in a second, less than a second. And it's a very big image versus these other things are kind of quiet, they happen slowly, but bam, we have a shift that is pretty explosive. There's that. Okay, so we did all of those connotation elements. So that was our C, so we did that. A, so as we looked, because we had all that repetition, we can say that the attitude is doubtful, sad, unsure, and scared. If you were to say, oh, this poem is about somebody being very happy, false. That is not true. Because we have a lot of questions, we have a lot of really just kind of almost sad things like something drying up, something rotting, something just being too syrupy. It's not very positive, so it's a little bit negative as well. You could say this has like a negative attitude, but for me the biggest one is doubtful. And we have our shift. So the poem shifts from rot, D-O, decay, and then it goes to explosions and a big finale. That's how it ends. So it starts kind of slow and then boom, it ends. So our last T is title again. So we don't have a confirmation about the location or the exact person's experience. But I did some research. Turns out that Langston Hughes, he is an African American man. He's a Black man, so he's talking from his own experience. So when I mentioned here, I was kind of right. So Langston Hughes was a Black man, so therefore this is him sharing his perspective on what can happen to a dream. Okay, so if you notice so far, for most of these blocks, they're complete sentences. I'm using all the information in this poem to really make a deep and profound analysis. And this last T is for theme. So the theme is, I wouldn't call it hope, but I kind of like the idea where I found for attitude, So I would say this poem has a theme of doubt. This is because the poet uses specific images to show what happens when things go wrong or if they are neglected. Okay, so there, even though I could just say, oh, the theme is about doubt. But because we're practicing our, not only our English skills, but our thinking skills. You may think of all of this in Spanish first, that's fine. And then we work on our skills in English too. But we have to really make sure that we're doing our best to explain what's happening in our mind to someone else. So in this case, the someone else is me, your teacher. But it's still a really important thing for us to share everything that we're thinking of. Just like in math class, I don't know if some of you have, Ms. Cantu or what's her name? Villagrana or Carpenter, Miss Carpenter. But what do they tell you? Show your work. You can't just say, oh, X is 20. Well, how? Show your work. How did you get to X? And that's what we're doing here with TPCast. You're showing how you thought about the title, how you paraphrased, what elements you looked for. So if I say, okay, looking for elements, and if I see your paper and it looks like this, okay, I know where you're looking. If you turn it in a digital version and you have all these different colors happening, great, you showed your work. You're showing that you're looking at these poems in depth with profound thinking. And so like I did want to show you that when you turn one in, and I'm going to show you the work right now, I want you to have a copy of just the poem by itself. And then you can have a picture of something like this where it has a lot of different colors or markings. Or if you're going to do it in a digital way, I want you to show, the different colors, a highlight, circle, underline. And of course, I just did a table like this. If you have another method or another way to organize, that's fine. But I want to see T, P, C, A, S, T, T, and see what you have to say about each of those steps, each of those passes for your analysis. Okay. Okay, so in Schoology, we're not going to have time today, but we'll continue tomorrow. So I put the PowerPoint presentation of this intro analysis. I also released poem styles. So it's a really good idea for today for you to look at that presentation. So tomorrow morning when I go through it, I'm going to go a little fast, but that way you have questions you can ask. You can ask me questions about the styles today. That's fine. So I want you to find a poem to analyze. So you find a poem and make that analysis. Start with TPCast. I'll give you notes and see how you do. It can be on paper, it can be digital, whichever method you feel more comfortable doing. Yeah. So for today, the writing poetry and poetry project, we are going to do that tomorrow. So don't worry about that yet. They're available, but so you can start looking. And compare, but don't turn anything in yet. You have until tomorrow to do that. But I did want to show you, you have to rotate it, but at least it's there, you can download them. But I did a poster. So here we have, this is the original Harlem poster. And then I have a version of it that has all kinds of marks on it. Yeah. So here we have like red for repetition, rhyme, metaphor, image, simile. I have that here. Now remember, these are just the connotation elements, but it still needs to have a full analysis like this. You still need to explain your work here, but it's still really good to find those elements and to mark them in the poem itself. Okay. For next week, my goal is that on Monday we start something new. We start with drama, but if we need a little bit more time with poetry, we can continue Monday. But I have faith we can finish tomorrow. Any questions that you have, remember you can ask me in several different ways. I'm looking at your work so far for other things. It's looking great. So for tomorrow, we're going to have, an assignment for you to write a poem based off of the poem styles that we have. And you're also going to have a little project for poetry where you add an analysis of your own poem and a visual representation. It could be a video, a drawing, painting, a collage. If you cut out pictures from somewhere, that'll be an option. But again, don't do that yet. That's for Friday. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.